So go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
All right, I see a number of new faces in the crowd today. Good. So who's never been here before?
Never.
Well, welcome.
Never.
Welcome to the
I
Michigan
can't
Military
hear.
Technical and Historical Society Museum. Our goal is to preserve the story of Michigan and its contribution to the defense of this country over the last century or so. So this is part of our fall, winter, I guess now we're officially into the winter part of our lecture series. Thankfully you all braved it. Looks like the roads cleared up in time for everybody to make it. So thank you all for coming and out in the cold. I'm going to give you a rundown of what we have coming up. The next presentation will be on February 23rd. It's going to be about Detroit on VE Day. Professor Karen Miller from Oakland University will be coming and talking about how Detroit spent the victory in Europe. So that'll be for the 75th anniversary that is coming up in May. We booked Karen a little early because there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's a whole bunch of other people planning things in May, so we figured we'd give everybody a little primer so they can appreciate what's happening. The next presentation after that will be in March, on March 29th. Tom Dalton and Jim Edelman from Under the Radar will be coming, and they'll be doing a meet and greet. They'll be signing and selling their book, and just kind of talking about the stuff that they do. Hopefully they like the museum and they'll come back and do some more with us. And then our final winter presentation will be on April 19th. Robert Kripke will be talking about Ford Motor Company and the Arsenal of Democracy, which ties in right now with the special exhibit that we have going on, the Jeeps of Ford. We currently have one of the 1941 prototype Jeeps on loan to us. So at the moment in the museum we have 3 of the 4 major variants of the Jeep that Ford manufactured, not just in World War II, but in the Cold War era as well. So we have some booklets about that out here by the museum entrance. Feel free to check it out. I hope you enjoy it. And then we also, freshly printed today, we have our summer events that are scheduled. We do 3 living history events in conjunction with the Chesterfield Historic Society up there on Sugar Bush in 21. June we will be doing a living history timeline event, which is living history from really the French and Indian Wars, I think actually from the Voyageurs era all the way, gone all the way through Vietnam actually. July we have a World War II living history event, and in August we will be doing a Vietnam living history event. This is the 2nd year for that. It seemed to be very popular. I'd like to also thank, we have our sponsors for the lecture series. This year, our sponsors were Socrates Sturgio, back there. George Lowe and Amelia Matash. Here you are, I saw you over there. Carla Marcia McDaniels, I don't think made it today. Dave Corey and Rita Lamoro also. And then the International Plastic Modeler Society Warren chapter is also one of our sponsors. Anybody who has young children of their family, we do a Young Modelers program every Saturday morning from 10 to noon. It is free. So if you have kids that like to build scale models or want to learn about it, bring them by, and those gentlemen will teach them, give them the finer points of putting together plastic models. Again, all of our lectures are by donation. Please be generous in the gray box. Heat is expensive. Snowplowing is incredibly expensive. So thank you very much for coming. And I guess without further ado, I will turn the microphone over to Robert Meyer from the Historic Society of Michigan.
Thanks, Chris. Hey. Afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
All right, now work it that way. All right, well, my name's Bob Myers. I'm the Director of Education for Historical Society of Michigan. We're based in Lansing. We are not, everybody confuses us with the State Museum, Library, Archives. That's not us. We were founded in 1828, and Way back when, it was kind of all one and the same, and then they split off about a century ago, and the museum archives and everything went one direction, we went another. Not a hostile split by any means. So we're not a collecting organization, but we have conferences, we have educational programs, publish Michigan History Magazine. Anybody here take Michigan History Magazine? Okay, a couple of you do. Okay, great. That's a lot of us know us best. We do Michigan History Day and that sort of thing for school children. So we're a little different organization that way. But that's not what you're here for today. We're going to introduce you today to a remarkable woman from Michigan, Harriet Quimby. And by the way, I tend to be a fairly informal person, so if you have any questions, comments as we go along, just feel free at any time. You know, we're not going to do a real formal lecture here with this. But we're going to learn a little bit today about Harriet Quimby. And if you notice the title here, Michigan's New Woman Aviatrix. Well, Harriet Quimby was born in 1875, and in the kind of the turn of the century, the turn of the last century, we have to qualify that now, we have what people often refer to as the New Woman. It's a change from the Victorian age. If you're a woman in the Victorian era, the 1870s, 80s, what is your role in the world? Class participation time, folks.
Domestic.
You're domestic, right? Domestic work. Doing what? Taking care of the house, taking care of the children, cooking, cleaning. Are you working outside the home? No, not ideally, no. That's the poor women who are doing that. But what you aspire to for any woman of any means is you don't work outside the home. You're caring for the children, doing the cooking and the cleaning and so forth. Where does your money come from? Your husband. Yeah, you have to marry well. How many of you watched Downton Abbey? Yeah, okay. Yeah, fess up. Come on. Yeah, it's a soap, but it's a good soap. And the women are looking to marry well, even in Downton Abbey time. Okay, so we're going to learn about someone who's a new woman of the 20th century, who's breaking out of that mold. Now let's see if I can figure out how to get this to work. Oh, hey, it's working. Okay, well, Harriet Quimby, these are her parents, William and Ursula Quimby. Much later in life, it's the only photograph I've ever been able to find of her parents. This is, she's one of a couple of daughters. She had a younger daughter, Jenny, and that's Harriet there on the right. And incidentally, if you watch the photographs, you never see her without a hat. I found one photograph of her hatless. She always wore a hat. Well, she's born, the family had moved to Coldwater, Michigan, down in southern Michigan. Her father, William, was a Civil War veteran. And apparently, the early family history is kind of unclear, but apparently, as part of his Civil War pension, he got land up in Arcadia, or near Arcadia, in Manistee County. So if you see the map there on the left, and then on the right, the right hand, you got the arrow pointing to the farm there. He had a small farm there in Arcadia, and that is where Harriet was born in May of 1875. So she's born in the last 3/4 of as we go into the end of the 19th century. And for a long time, people thought Harriet was born in Coldwater. She never talked, and we'll get to that a little bit later too. But she was actually born on the farm up in Arcadia, Michigan. This is a school that she attended. We don't know much about her education either. Apparently, grew up there in Arcadia and went to this school. We don't know that she even went to high school. But attended this little one-room school up in Arcadia Township. Well, then about 1887, the family moves to Arroyo Grande, California, Los Gatos, 1893, to San Francisco. And so they leave Michigan and move out to California. Well, Harriet is very like Alice Roosevelt. Probably some of you have heard stories of Alice Roosevelt. Yeah, a totally uncontrollable young woman, Theodore Roosevelt's daughter, by his first wife, Alice, also named Alice. And to give you a little bit of idea of Alice Roosevelt's character, she drove cars, she smoked cigarettes, she did everything imaginable, came in for some criticism while Theodore was president, and he remarked, "I can control Alice or I can run the country. I cannot possibly do both." Well, Harriet is kind of like Alice. And so here you have, and of course this is breaking molds. What do we have up here on the left-hand side? What's the mold being broken? Yeah, the man is washing the clothes. Society is being turned upside down here. Yeah. Society is being turned upside down. Very unsettling to people. This is very unsettling. You know, we look at it, it's kind of funny. The guy washing the clothes. Well, there's a hard edge to that, though. Men are doing women's work, women doing men's work. What is she doing? Yeah. Sitting there reading a magazine called The Truth, while her husband does the laundry. Very, very unsettling time. Rapid change in technology. You know, we think, oh my gosh, everything's changing now, right? Oh my man, the computer? Nonsense. Nothing much is changing now. It's changing back then. It's changing then. If you had somebody who was born in, say, 1900 and got transported to 1950, the world has changed totally. 1950 to 2000, 2020, not that much. Not that much. And we have computers and stuff. We have the car, we have the airplane, we have the electricity, the light bulb, radio, television, all that kind of thing. 1900 to 1950, it's transformed. The world is transformed. And so this is very unsettling to people. And this is what Harriet Quimby is growing up in. So here's the thing going on. The new woman in society, she's starting to demand equality. Oh, heaven forbid. My goodness, equality for women. They're driving automobiles. The vote. We're at the centennial now of women gaining the vote. Here's women riding bicycles. The woman on the right lower, what's she doing? Smoking a cigarette. Man, oh my gosh, all the things that women are doing. They're drinking alcohol, for goodness sake. Yeah, so the new woman is looking for equality in society, breaking out of that Victorian era role. Well, what's Harriet Quimby doing? Well, she's living now in California, and she becomes a writer. Now, we don't know where that comes from. Just starting to write, but she becomes a drama critic for the San Francisco Dramatic Review. And she is reviewing, going around and reviewing plays and writing about them. And she tries her hand at stage theater. In movies we call them an extra, where you don't have any speaking lines, but you go in your background. You're sitting in a restaurant, and the actors are doing their thing, but you're just kind of background. In theater, they're called supernumerary actors, and these would be these humongous productions, and you just need people to fill out a party scene. And so Harriet and the other hopeful supers would hang out outside the theater, and the director would come out and say, okay, you, and you, come on in, we'll get you in costume. All right, now in the party scene, you go out and you just stand in the background and you pretend to have a conversation, and you sip coffee. And that's what they would do. So Harriet tries her hand at that. She actually did appear on stage with Sarah Bernhardt as a super, and she doesn't seem to have gone anywhere with it. But being a drama critic, she wanted to get try her hand at stage theater too. 1903, she moves from California out to New York City. Now, is Harriet married? No, she is not. She's making her own way in the world. And she moves to New York City now as a writer, and she's writing for Leslie's Illustrated Weekly. Now, I don't know, how many of you have ever heard of Leslie's? Yeah, a couple of you, yeah. If you lived back then, you would have heard of Leslie's. This is one of the big literary magazines of the time. It carried a little bit like New Yorker today, Cosmopolitan, magazines like that. This is one of the biggies. And so she's writing drama pieces for Leslie's, and they start to send her all over the world, in fact, doing reporting. It's not just theater reviews and that sort of thing, but now Harriet, a single woman, is being sent to Asia, actually she went to Africa, to the Mideast, she went to South America, Central America, and she takes up residence at the Hotel Victoria. Now, one of the big posh hotels, New York City. Now, we think today as a hotel, what do you go to a hotel for today? Yeah, you're traveling. Yeah, you're traveling. Back early 20th century, a lot of people lived at hotels. That would be your residence. Rather than an apartment house or boarding house or something like that, you would actually live at a hotel. And so that's what Harriet is doing. And she takes up quarters at the Hotel Victoria and sends her for her parents, and they come out and live with her. So now she's supporting her parents and herself. Now, when she moves to somewhere around there, from the time she moves from California to New York City, she does a couple of things. Her birthplace becomes Arroyo Grande, which I think is it sounds better than Arcadia, Michigan. Yeah, it just sounds better. And she drops 10 years off of her age. So she is not born in 1875, she's born in 1885. Well, why not? You know, what's going to stop you? So she is a promoter of Harriet Quimby. Yeah, she is a self-promoter, and she has to be. She has to be. She is working in a man's world, and you don't get anywhere by being a wallflower, and Harriet understands that. She's a new woman, and she's got to be a self-promoter. Why not drop 10 years off your age? Why not change your birthplace? Why not do this? Why not do that? She's got to toot her own horn. I had a great uncle. He was an old Mennonite guy. He said, "Happy is the man who tooteth his own horn, for when he tooteth it, he knows that it hath been blown." You got to toot your own horn. Well, the Leslie starts sending her out on all kinds of assignments, writing assignments. And one of them, 1906, one of the big auto races. Now remember, automobiles are kind of in their infancy too, and automobile racing. And she goes out to cover one of these big automobile races, the Vanderbilt Cup, and she says, "I want to ride in one of the cars, in one of the race cars." Well, how do you ride in a race car? Well, back then, you had, race cars had 2 men on them. You had the driver and you had a mechanic. And so the mechanic rode right with the driver. So these are 2-seat race cars at that time. That's true up into the 19-teens. And so she says, "I want to ride in one of the cars for my story." And they had race teams at that time. So you had several cars, drivers, and so forth. Well, the driver, Herbert Lytle, is told, "All right, take Harriet." Harriet approaches him and says, "I want to go for a ride in the car." And he says, "No, I'm taking some woman for a ride in my race car, forget it." Well, the team owner found out about it, and he said, "Yes, you will. You're going to take her for We need the publicity is good. Part of it was selling cars. And if you win races, you sell cars. And this is good publicity. It's going to be in Leslie's Illustrated. You will take Harriet Quimby, the writer, for a ride in your race car. So Herbert Lytle says, okay, she wants to go for a ride in a race car? I'll take her for a ride in a race car. Gets the thing up to 100 miles an hour. Now remember, these are open cars. Yes. And he's going to scare the you-know-what out of this stupid woman writer. And so he gets the thing going up 100 miles an hour. They're literally going around curves on 2 wheels. And of course, the jolting is phenomenal on these things. And so he finally throttles it back to about 60 miles an hour, something like that. And he turns to her and says, so how did you like it? And she says, it wasn't very fast. Can't you make it 120? Blew his mind. He just dropped his jaw there. This is one of the few occasions where you'll find a photograph of Harriet without a hat, because her hat blew off on the car ride. She had guts. You gotta hand it to her. She had guts. And having taken a ride in a car, she learns to drive herself. And so this is Harriet at the wheel of a car. And so now you have this woman, this new woman of the 20th century driving as well. Again, few women did that. Alice Roosevelt being one, but women, you rode with your husband. And she's driving the car herself. And she goes all over the world for Leslie's. Europe, Egypt, Bahamas, everywhere. And sending back stories. Kind of, what are the things you would see if you went to the Bahamas? Of course, most people can't travel back then. And so, what are the customs like? What are the people like? She's traveling all over. Well, she's doing all this writing. Why not write for the movies? Yeah. The motion picture industry is brand new. Probably some of you have seen the old silents. You can get them on YouTube and stuff now. But you have all of these silent movies. And they're cranking, the studios are just cranking these things out. And so Harriet starts writing what we would now call screenplays for movies. Now again, there's no dialogue in these, really. They're scenes that are set up, and the actors are talking, but you can't hear them. So she did 5 movie scripts that we know of. This is some stills from one called The Blind Princess and the Poet. One of the big stars back then was Blanche Sweet, and the Biograph Blonde. Biograph was the studio that Harriet was writing for, and so we have a few stills from that. They're kind of little romantic dramas. Screen time was about 10 minutes for one of these movies. She also, by the way, these were, let's see, this is one, you can find this one on YouTube. Most of those old silents, unfortunately, are gone. They were shot on nitrate film, which self-destructs, and they have not lasted. But this one actually, Lines of White on a Sullen Sea, you can find on YouTube. And Harriet did not star in this, but one of her friends did. It's kind of this romantic drama and about a fisherman. And if you watch it, there's a brief scene, and I think I can spot Harriet Quimby in it. But most of those have disappeared. D.W. Griffith, famed director, was the director for all 5 of Harriet's movies. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. One of them starred a very young Mary Pickford. I thought, man, that's something. She was really going someplace. I wonder how many movies Mary Pickford was in that year. I think it was 1911. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Well, I found out Mary Pickford did something like 40 movies that year. I mean, they were just one after the other. So it wasn't quite as impressive as I thought. Let's see, it stars from Harriet's movie The Broken Cross. So anyway, so she's making a name for herself, writing for Leslie's. And by the way, the articles are not just in Leslie's Illustrated. These articles are picked up by newspapers all over the country. And so the Harriet Quimby byline is really becoming famous. Well, 1910, there's an international aviation tournament on Long Island. And Harriet gets sent out there to cover the aviation tournament. Now, aviation, again, in its infancy, real infancy. The Wright brothers had first flown at Kitty Hawk in 1903. This is only 7 years later. And it's kind of hard for us today to understand what kind of infancy aviation was in. There's no rules. There's really no idea. People are still learning how to... How do you fly an airplane anyway? They're getting the fundamentals down, the basics, but it's 1910. What can you do with an airplane? But really, take a guess. What can you do with an airplane?
Fly it.
Well, you can fly it, yeah. Carry passengers?
Yeah.
No.
All above.
Observation.
Observation, yeah, you can go up. And for military, the military is thinking kind of like cavalry, see what's over the next hill. You can't really, you could carry a passenger maybe, if somebody's crazy enough to go up with you. Freight? No. So what do you do with an airplane? Well, that's kind of what they're working out at these aviation meets. You can take one up and you can fly in an oval around the flying field. If you're really daring, you can fly in a figure 8. Or maybe you can fly out as much as 5-6 miles and then come back if you can find your way. But they're kind of figuring out what can you do with an airplane? And Harriet is sent out to cover that. Well, this is a big aviation meet. It's getting pilots in from all over. Now this is a photograph supposedly taken there. I think they've kind of photoshopped airplanes in. These are airplanes that, yes indeed, they were there. I don't think they were all up in the air like that at one time. But these are the big names in aviation. Wilbur and Orville Wright are there. Roland Garros, Glenn Curtis, Archie Hoxsey. These are the biggest names in aviation at the time. They're in the newspapers everywhere. And they're coming to compete. And this is what they're starting to figure out with airplanes, is that people will pay money to see them fly. Okay, that's good. And you can always count on a few crashes and at least one fatality. So that's pretty cool. And that's worth paying money to see somebody get killed, right? And so that's what they do at these aviation meets. And so here we have, this is the 1910, each of the aviation teams has its own hangars there, and just seeing these planes fly, and they would have competitions during the aviation meet for like flying at a distance. Can somebody actually fly 10 miles out and come back? Can they, an altitude record, could you get the thing up to maybe 3,000-4,000 feet in the air? Can you, speed records over a course, can you get the thing going like 60 miles an hour over a stretch of ground? They could time it and you'd get a prize for the speed record. And so they're offering prizes to these pilots. Well, Harriet covers the aviation meet. She says, I can do that. I'm going to try it. I've learned how to drive a car. I'm one of the top writers in the country. I've traveled the world. I'm going to fly an airplane too. And so she starts, she and Mathilde Moissant start taking flying lessons. And now Harriet is nothing if not flamboyant. She goes to a New York tailor and she says, I want a flying suit made. And so he's one of the big tailors in New York City, Alexander Green, and he designs a flying suit for Harriet. The photograph doesn't do it justice. It's a plum-colored silk flying suit, and it's drawn from this what was called an aviation skirt. As the caption, that got cut off a little bit at the bottom. Sooner or later, the women will wear trousers, but the first trouser skirts that we make must not have the appearance of being trousers. They must look highly conventional. We must bring them up by degrees. Don't spring too much on people at once. And so what Harriet's suit is, let me go back here. Her silk suit has a hood on it, so she can pull that up over her hair. Remember, the engines at that time are spraying exhaust back over the pilot. A lot of those are rotary engines. In other words, the whole engine spins. And they were lubricated with castor oil. So if you're the pilot of one of these airplanes, you're getting a spray of castor oil coming back over you, which lubricates not only the engine, but you're drinking castor oil, which has a laxative effect. They said that pilots ultimately, they kind of developed an immunity to it, or they would drink a thumping dose of blackberry brandy. And so you dealt with that. But the hood covers her hair, and she's got gloves and so forth on. And then the skirt can be buttoned and unbuttoned. And so it can become a skirt, and then when she's flying, of course, it's going to be hard to work the rudder pedals with a skirt, and so then she can button that up, and it becomes a set of pantaloons and her boots. So here she is, 1911. The fellow with the baton there is her flight instructor, Andre Hubert. Yes, it's a French school, by the way. The French were the leaders in aviation at that time. And so here's Harriet and Matilda there in the center, some of the men who are learning flying, also the students. And they're in New York at this flying school and learning how to fly an airplane. Here's John Wesson. He was the, and Mademoiselle Fifi. He was the owner of the flying school, and Matilda's brother, by the way. And so he and the cat flew the English Channel in 1910. So, yeah, aviation in its infancy. There are no rules, there's no regulations at that time. You know, today I got my pilot's license about 20 years ago, and you know you have what are called the FARs, the Federal Aviation Regulations, and they regulate everything. Why? Because of government bureaucrats? No, it's because people died, and you don't want to be dead. And so there are no aviation regulations. Who's to say if you're a qualified pilot? You know, today you have all kinds of, you have to be able to do this and this and this and this and this to certain specifications, approved by a flight instructor, a Czech pilot. Back then, no. There's nothing. And so it's not until 1926 that we have an aeronautics branch. 1926. So here's Harriet. She's flying in a Blériot monoplane, French built. It is state-of-the-art at that time. A 25 horsepower engine. So they're severely underpowered. I corresponded with someone who flies a Blériot, and he said, well, deep down inside there is a practical airplane somewhere. But it is very underpowered. The control surfaces are operated by warping. In other words, there's no aileron, no elevator. You pull on the stick and the rudder pedals, and it kind of warps the wing, and that's your control surfaces. So just flying one of these things, attempting to, is incredibly dangerous. But Harriet is taking lessons. And this is picture of what, a little better image of what it would be. It's a air-cooled engine, canvas and sticks. Well, Harriet nailed her landing, and that was one of the few requirements, or if you can call it a requirement. You had to be able to land in a certain spot from where you took off, and she did it. So the license, her pilot's like, yeah.
They were all single seats, right? So when she took lessons, there was no instructor on with it, right?
No, usually you didn't have an instructor in the plane. And that was kind of true up through. Well, there were different schools of thought in flying. Would you fly better if you had an instructor in the plane, or if you just kind of worked up to it gradually on your own? And so the French in World War I often they would start you out on what were called rollers, and the plane would just roll along the ground. It couldn't fly, its wings were too short, but you got an idea of how to control the thing, and there's no brakes on them either. And then you got into what were called the penguins. They would actually lift up a little bit, and then you just kind of gradually worked up from there. Yeah.
It seemed like in those days, when they took flying lessons, that they were expected to fly and perform by themselves. I guess was it to prove that they were paying attention or something?
Yeah. If you didn't die, it was. Yeah, the idea was they would. Now there were some planes that had instructors. Wilbur and Orville Wright built planes that you could take two up in, and but you also typically today you solo in about 20 hours. That's average. I think I soloed in about 21 hours, something like that. Average about 70 hours to get your pilot's license. They were soloing in like an hour and a half of instruction. And sometimes with no instructor, you just went up. You just learned to kind of control it on the ground, and then you got into little hops, and then you learned how to turn. And so Harriet in 1911 meets the requirement of the Aero Club of America, and she gets license number 37. 37th person in the United States to get a license, and the first woman to do so. And so this is her after her landing. Now the story in the newspapers, the story was that Harriet was going out pre-dawn and taking flying lessons at the Moisant Flying Club, so that no one would realize that a woman was doing this. Nonsense. Come on, she's a self-promoter wearing a purple flying suit. No, she is not hiding this at all. I think she was going out early in the morning, but that's when it's easiest to fly because you don't have winds and so forth. Early morning, late, and evening are the nicest times to be flying. The air is much calmer then. Matilda Moisant got her license 2 weeks later. And so here you have her with her flying suit, modeled very much Harriet's. You might notice a swastika hanging from her pocket. That's a good luck charm. The swastika is an age-old symbol of good luck. It's not until the Nazis of the 1930s that it becomes to have a dark side to it. But you'll often see swastikas like that as a good luck charm. Harriet carried a good luck bracelet as well. A lot of pilots did. Well, of course, she's getting a lot of publicity now. She's not only a writer, a well-known writer, but now she's the bird woman. And here the San Francisco Sunday Call, America's first bird woman is a San Francisco girl. From here in San Francisco. She's not from Michigan. Yeah, Harriet's not claiming to be from Michigan. No, she's a California girl. Born in 1885. Wrong. But, why disabuse them of that notion? Well, Harriet now is the first woman pilot in America. But you gotta keep building on this. You can't rest on your laurels. You gotta do something more. So in 1912, she crosses the Atlantic on the steamer America. And what's she going to do? She's going to fly the English Channel. She's going to be the first woman to fly the English Channel. It's a distance of 20 miles across open water. 20 miles in an airplane. Wow. Wow. Well, Louis Blériot had, whose airplane she was flying, that company, had flown the Channel in 1909. And he'd flown it to Dover, Calais to Dover, and landed. This is still there, by the way, showing where Louis Blériot landed. Made it just to the coast. Harriet's examining where his plane came to rest. She's going to do it flying England to France. So she'll be the first woman to fly the English Channel. What is that going to mean? Headlines, fame and fortune. Harriet is a self-promoter. And so she goes across to France. She borrows a Blériot airplane. I don't know who it was, I forget who it was that was crazy enough to loan her an airplane. But they did, they loaned her an airplane. But of course it's good for Blériot as well. Actually, she borrowed it from Louis Blériot. But it's good for Blériot as well because he's trying to sell airplanes. Big headlines for Blériot and big headlines for Harriet. So here she is getting ready to fly the English Channel. That's Harriet there in the center in her plum-colored flying suit, putting on gloves. It's going to be very cold flying the Channel. It's April of 1912. Now we think, oh my gosh, it's a 20-mile flight across the Channel. That 20 miles in an airplane, 20 miles is nothing. That's nothing. In 1912, that's a long way. And you could, if you look at the map here, Dover to Calais, or in this case, Calais to Dover, can you see the danger if you get off course? You're heading out over miles and miles and miles and miles of open water. And that water is, even in the summer, it's ice cold. And down at the bottom we have the cockpit of a Blériot 11. And you can see the sophisticated navigation instrumentation on one of those. You've got one, I think that is a, let me think, that may be a tachometer. That's all you've got. And it's hazy over the Channel. At the best of times, fog, you can get in fog, and it's awfully easy to get several degrees off course, which is going to take you out over open water, and you're going to go down into the drink, and you're not coming back out, quite frankly. So it is a very, very dangerous proposition to fly the English Channel. And Harriet makes it. Lands right on the beach at the little French town of Hardelot. And the people there were, of course, astounded to see an airplane land and a woman in it. And there they are, literally carrying Harriet on their shoulders up the beach. And so she is the first woman to fly the English Channel. Well, unfortunately, it's April of 1912. What happened in April of the Titanic? Yeah, she makes the cover of a French magazine, but the big story is the Titanic. And so that gets all the headlines. Harriet Quimby, instead of being front page news in the papers, here's the New York Times, and Harriet appears a day later on page 15, buried back there in the paper. And so she doesn't get the renown that she thought she would from being the first woman to fly the English Channel. But she comes back, how are we doing on time? Oh, not too bad. She comes back to the United States with a new airplane. She's got something that really is state-of-the-art. It's not a 25 horsepower engine in her plane. It's a 70 horsepower known. It's a rotary. This is one that the whole engine spins. Basically, the only way it started and it ran. It ran full out. The only way you could slow one down, you didn't have a throttle on one, you just cut out, there was a switch where you could cut out some of the cylinders, which also meant that the fuel was still being pumped into the cylinder, it just didn't get burned. So you've got a good fire hazard as well. But it's a two-seater. With 70 horsepower, you can carry 2 people in it, and it's still underpowered. But it's a two-seater, and she comes back with this new state-of-the-art airplane. Well, again, what do you do with an airplane? You really can't carry passengers for hire in one. You can't carry freight in one. But there are flying teams going around and doing demonstrations. One of the demonstrations, right about the same time, 1911, a flight across America. Not just like a 10-mile flight. This is going across all of America. Now, by no means non-stop, but still an incredible achievement. Galbraith Rogers flies it across the country. Vin Fizz soda sponsored it. It was grape soda. He was killed right just a couple of weeks before Harriet made her trans-channel flight. He struck a bird and crashed, was killed. So Harriet comes back, and she becomes the spokesperson for Vin Fizz, replacing Rogers. And there she is in her purple suit, sparkling grape drink, it's purple. But unfortunately, as it says here, Vin Fizz tasted like a cross between river water and horse slop. They had a lot of quality control with it. Apparently it gave you diarrhea if you drank it. So it didn't do very well. It was kind of a flop as a soda pop. Now, supposedly, it was produced by Armour and Company, the meatpacking plant company. Now, supposedly, Harriet was their spokesperson. I haven't been able to document that. It may be that she was. It may be that they just used her image and didn't pay her. I don't know. I haven't been able to find that. I find it a little hard to believe, though, that Harriet would have let anybody use her image without permission and without compensation. But I can't find any evidence that that she was officially their spokesperson.
A question.
Yeah.
That airplane she flew then, did she own it, or did the company she worked for own it?
Yeah, she owned that. Yeah,
okay.
she bought that. The one she flew across the channel she borrowed, but this one she bought. Well, these aviation meets are still going. Incidentally, the Wright brothers finally dropped out of it. So many pilots were being killed that they didn't want anything more to do with it. But in 1912, summer of 1912, she's doing the air show, what we would now call the air show circuit. And here she is for the Boston Aviation Meet, one of the big air shows of the country. And there she is right at the front, Miss Harriet Quimby. The guy in the center is Lincoln Beechey. He was the Chuck Yeager of the 19-teens. First man to do a loop in an airplane. Did some incredible stunt flying. And so there's Harriet in front. Blanche Stewart Scott next to her over here on the our left. But these are the big names: Archie Freeman, Glenn Curtis, Glenn Martin. You've heard of Martin Aviation. Archie Freeman. These are the big names in aviation. And there's Harriet right in front. Why? Partly because she's a woman. People will come to see a woman fly an airplane. And that's part of it. But she was also a very accomplished aviator in and of her own right. And yeah, she's still the first woman pilot in America. She's still the first woman to fly the English Channel. Didn't get the headlines she hoped for, but she's made a name for herself. Well, the aviation meet consisted of all kinds of stunt flying, what we would call stunt flying, distance records, speed records, that sort of thing. And the organizer of the meet was a fellow named William Willard. That's him there in the passenger seat, and Harriet in the seat just before taking off. And she gave Willard a ride out over Boston Harbor. And she had actually done that the day before. This is the second time she's given him a ride. And so there they are, up in the air in Harriet's Blériot, and something went wrong. At about 1,000 feet up, the airplane suddenly just pitched forward. Willard was thrown out of the passenger seat, and then Harriet thrown out right after him. And people were there. They came down in shallow water. People went out in rowboats. This is Harriet being carried back. Both of them, of course, were killed instantly. Bringing Harriet's body to the shore. Willard's son was watching. And people inspecting the wreckage of the airplane. You can see it came down. The plane actually just, with its occupants having been thrown out, the plane just sort of glided down and landed in the water. Well, what happened? We'll probably never know. Three possibilities, and there is a Blériot 11 still flying out at Old Rhinebeck Aerodrome in New York. And I corresponded with the pilot who flies it. And he was familiar with the accident. He said, I'm not going to really pass judgment or speculate to any great degree on what happened in this particular instance, but there are three things that come to mind. One is a control system failure. Some kind of mechanical failure, and that was incredibly common in these planes. Flying is in its infancy. Wind shear. And as he put it doesn't take much to upset a Blériot 11. They are very temperamental, underpowered, so it's possible that they got hit with some kind of wind shear. Wind shear is a sudden change in direction of the wind. You can ordinarily it can be it's pretty mild. The airport I used to fly out of, there was just kind of this little kind of drainage ditch at the end of the runway, and it wasn't really wind shear, but you could every time you came into land, you'd be coming in like this, and all of a sudden, whoop, whoop, just from the air moving up over that drainage ditch. But it can be violent, and has even knocked down airliners. And so it could have been some kind of wind shear. It might have been Willard, the passenger, accidentally following the controls. These control wires are just running open there in these airplanes. He could have leaned over, maybe got a leg caught in the control wires. We'll probably never know. Personally, I tend to think wind shear. But that's just kind of speculation. The end result was that both of them were killed. Harriet's body was brought back to New York City. She's buried today in Valhalla. The body was moved in 1913. Of course, she was killed wearing her plum-colored flying suit. That unfortunately was stolen from the morgue, and nobody knows where it is today. Buried in fairly good company. Some of the other people there in the cemetery: Lou Gehrig, Billy Burke from Wizard of Oz fame, Rachmaninoff is buried there. But Harriet inspired women too. And a lot of the women who later rose to fame were inspired by Harriet Quimby, by the groundbreaking flying that she did. Jackie Cochran, Nancy Harkness Love from Houghton, Michigan, formed the Wasps in World War II. Amelia Earhart, I think, patterned herself. She was a huge self-promoter. She had to be. And I think she patterned herself on Harriet Quimby. Jackie Cochran, in World War II, as you probably know, women flew everything in the arsenal. Bombers, fighters, everything. In fact, there's a story with Jackie Cochran. I'll digress for just a second. There's a story of Jackie Cochran. A new bomber had come out. It was called the B-26, twin-engine bomber. It was really hot, and there were a lot of accidents with it. And the male pilots said, "We're not flying this thing. It's too dangerous." And Jackie Cochran said, "Let my girls fly it." And they did. There wasn't any more talk anymore about the B-26 being too hot a plane to handle. It also had the lowest loss record of any plane in the U.S. arsenal in World War II. Very successful. Women today. If you're a private pilot up flying, you hear other pilots talking. You hear a lot of women talking. You have airline pilots. Probably some of you have flown on airliners with women pilots. They're now flying in the military, flying everything in the arsenal. Fighter pilots, they're flying carrier missions. And Harriet Quimby broke ground for women. Well, her home is still there in Arcadia. It is an absolute wreck, falling down. I wish somebody would go out and do a restoration of that house. It's in obviously very bad condition. There is a state historic marker there marking her birthplace, her childhood home. But the house is just about falling apart. But the United States recognizes Harriet Quimby. 1991, airmail stamp. She and Blanche Stewart Scott are the only two women ever to be on airmail stamps. And inducted into the National Aviation Hall of Fame and into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame. So the legacy lives on. And I've probably kept you just about enough time. Questions, comments, rebuttals?
Where did you get learned? Where was your flying instruction? Around here, or?
No, I personally learned to fly over in. I soloed in Dowagiac in Southwest Michigan, and then got my license in Berrien Springs, which is a little town over there in Southwest Michigan.
My cousin is flight instructor in Midland.
Oh, in Midland. Okay.
Yeah. She's been doing it for 25 years now.
Oh, really? Yeah. Well, I love flight instructors. They say, flight instructors solo their students when the students finally scares them so badly they don't want to fly with them anymore. So it's probably true. Yeah.
You said in the beginning multiple times you don't know a lot about the early period of time. You don't know this. You don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because of her? Did she keep a lot of things
She
quiet,
would-
or and nothing against you?
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody really done a real big, extensive research on her? I mean, because women in those days were. I mean, maybe she didn't, but diaries, letters. There's nothing.
There is nothing. She kept. It's kind of ironic, and I'm glad you brought it up. It's kind of ironic that for as big a self-promoter as she was, very little about herself personally. She was 37 when she died. There are no, to my knowledge, no letters, diaries. There's no record of any boyfriends, certainly no husband. Her personal life was very private. And so in a lot of ways, and she obviously made up things. So we don't know a whole lot about her. Somebody needs to write a really good book about her. There are a couple of books available, but in my opinion, they're kind of lacking. And
Industry hash things that are.
yeah, some rehashings, and it
So, I
really.
mean, in historical wise, we're only talking 100 years ago, or 100, so, I mean, it's not a long time ago.
No, it's not that long ago.
And, yeah, and it just seems strange, like you say, photos of her, like, without her hat and all that. I mean, women wore hats, but there was a lot of pictures of women with their hair, you know, not down maybe, but it just seems like she was, I don't know.
Yeah, and I've tried to track her through like city directories in New York City. When did she move into the hotel there? She lived briefly in a boarding house in New York. I've tracked that down. The hotel's gone, the boarding house is gone. But she didn't. She wrote about her achievements, not about herself.
Family never did, like you said, she had a younger sister, right? You said?
Yeah, she died fairly young, and her parents. Let's see, her father. I think her mother, I think, died not long after Harriet was killed, and then her father a few years later. And we don't know. Her father actually, he was sort of a hard-scrabble farmer, and then they made patent medicines called Quimby's Liver Invigorator and Blood Restorer. And her mom cooked the stuff up on the sink, and her dad peddled it. But I haven't even been able to find records of sales of the Liver Invigorator. So,
If I may, Coldwater Airport has a museum in her honor.
yes,
And they sell books and information. And the local city also has an acting troupe, at least 10 years ago, that I've seen was where they used to come in garb to various events and actually dress up like her and talk period and so forth. So they celebrate her quite well there. The book they sell there is one I've read, and while he's most correct, she doesn't talk about much of her life. She does talk about what it was like to drive. It'd be the first woman to drive in a city, getting a license when they wanted a male on board, and so forth. So it went into a lot of detail.
Yeah, there is a state historic marker at the Coldwater Airport. It was thought for some time, and so little is known about her childhood, that she was born and raised in Coldwater. And turns out, no, there was another Quimby family there. Her father did live there, her parents did live there briefly, but moved to Arcadia. So.
Did you say she was the second woman in the world to get a license? Who would be the first?
Let's see, there was a woman, and I forget her name, a French woman, who got her license a little bit earlier than Harriet. Harriet was the first American woman.
Is that a common thing back then for people of note like her to just come up with their own biography?
Oh yeah.
Embellish it?
Oh yeah, it was not uncommon at all. People often traveled under pseudonyms, not for any nefarious purpose, but simply because you could. It can be quite hard to literally track somebody because they would register at hotels under false names. They would take passage on ships under false names. That was not at all uncommon. And of course even today, actors will sometimes shave a little age off of themselves. But at that time it was so easy because often people didn't. There's no birth certificate for Harriet Quimby, but that's not uncommon. Not everybody had a birth certificate. There's no social security card. So if I say that I'm 28 years old, well, how are you going to prove otherwise? And so people would do that. Okay. Just a couple of quick commercial announcements. Put this up. A couple of announcements for Historical Society of Michigan. Please come up and take some of these. We have conferences every year. Our local history conference, or it's called Michigan in Perspective. It's about not just local history, but history all over the state. That's in Sterling Heights, coming up the end of March. We'd love to have you attend the conference. We keep the price pretty low, but we have a great 2-day conference. We have Michigan History Day coming up in April. Actually, it goes local, district, and state competitions. Students do projects. They can do a paper, a website, a video documentary, an exhibit. They compete all the way going up to nationals. This last year we had, for the first time in a long time, we had a Michigan student who placed #1 in the state. Why am I bringing it up to a bunch of adults? Well, we have one student here, but a bunch of adults. Well, it's because we always need judges for History Day. If you have an enthusiasm for history, if you're willing to come and judge at the local level or the district level, or even go, our state competition will be at CMU. We would love to have you as a judge. If you're willing to give half a day of your time to critique some projects, and if you're above room temperature, we would love to have you. Let's see. We have a monthly lecture series, the second Wednesday of every month. And you don't have to drive to Lansing to attend it. You can, if you have a computer and the internet, you can sit at home in your jammies with a bottle of adult beverage, and you can watch the program at home. And if you are you have to be a member of, well, if you're not a member of the Historical Society of Michigan, it's $7 to remote in or attend. If you are a member of the Historical Society of Michigan, it's free. Can't beat the price. And in fact, they can have, if Chris wanted to, he could remote it in here as a program. We offer it to our member organizations free of charge. And so they can do that. We have Michigan History Magazine. If you are a member, you get this automatically, or you can just subscribe to the magazine, either one. How many of you are subscribers? Yeah, a couple of people. You're subscribers? Okay. So if you are not, we would love to have you as a subscriber of Michigan History Magazine. You will be educated, erudite, sophisticated. People will look up to you at parties because of your sophistication. If not, you can sit at home and wallow in ignorance. See if I can. Now, how much, you might ask, is a subscription to this bi-monthly magazine that will make you urbane and sophisticated? Well, ordinarily it's $24.95 a year, but today only, with a set of steak knives. No, I'm kidding. But when I go out and do programs, they tell me not $5 off the price for an annual subscription. So you can subscribe for $19.95, and you get the magazine. If you're a member, you get the magazine. We also do a quarterly members magazine as well, called The Chronicle, and we'd love to have you as a member. You can subscribe today only. I think that is about it. So thank you so much for, and I almost forgot, if you're not a member here, support your local organizations, history organizations. They do great work, they need support. Yes, your undying gratitude is fine, but memberships are also, they're so important. We need to keep history alive, more so now than ever. History is being often distorted, and we need to keep history alive. And Chris happens to have a form. I bet that you would not only get Chris's undying gratitude, but he would get your money. And that is so important. So thank you for supporting local history. Magazines, by the way. Anybody get a free magazine? Otherwise, I have to carry it back. To subscribe, I've got a form right here. And you just fill that out. It says $24.95. I do $19.95.
When did they drop the age in the U.S.? It's pretty low.
Oh, really?
Is it quite at